No secretary ever lasted longer than 3 weeks with Graham Whitaker, Denver's Millionaire CEO, known for his cold precision and impossible standards. Then came Lila Hartman. She wasn't polished, she wasn't pedigreed, she was late to her own interview, wore secondhand clothes, and spoke with a blunt honesty that made boardrooms hold their breath. Yet, somehow, this woman who lived by color-coded sticky notes and midnight cups of sweet coffee didn't just survive Graham's world, she began to change it. But what happens when an unflinching executive, raised to believe dependency is weakness, meets a woman who has built her strength from caregiving, scraped knees, and survival? Can truth stand against gossip in a room that wants women smaller? Can tenderness really coexist with power? And what do you do when the person you need most is also the one you fear needing it all? This is not just a story about corporate deals or broken routines. It is about what happens when control meets chaos, when ambition collides with empathy, and when two people discover that the greatest risk isn't failure, it's love. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. The elevators of downtown Denver had a way of making people feel small. Pause. 32 floors of steel and glass, with every reflection reminding you whether you belong there or not. Lila Hartman adjusted the strap of her canvas tote as the elevator shuddered upward. The tote was heavy with notebooks, highlighters, and the sort of pens she bought in bulk because they always went missing. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the hum, "Breathe in, breathe out. You can handle this." It wasn't a pep talk full of fireworks. It was a steady rhythm, the kind of breathing she had learned after long nights caring for her aunt, steadying her heart before calling the pharmacy, before filling out insurance forms, before yet another doctor's appointment. That same rhythm had carried her here. To a job interview she wasn't sure she'd survive, but one she couldn't afford to lose. When the elevator chimed at 32, Lila stepped forward, a little too quickly. Beat. The paper coffee cup in her hand tilted dangerously, leaving a pale trail of latte down the side. She caught it, but not before a drop landed on the corner of her resume. She dabbed at it with her sleeve. Too late. The glass doors to Whitaker and Reeves Holdings loomed ahead. Lila tugged her scarf tighter around her neck and pushed through, except the revolving door caught the fringe of her scarf, tugging her backward like a stubborn dog on a leash. By the time she freed herself, her hair had come loose from its clip, and two junior analysts sipping from branded mugs were already whispering. She pretended not to see. Inside, the reception desk gleamed, chrome edges, spotless counters, and a receptionist in a blazer that looked more expensive than Lila's entire closet. "Interview for executive assistant," Lila announced. Her voice was calm, not loud, not rushed. Calm, like she meant every syllable. The receptionist checked the clock. 10:08. The interview had been set for 10 sharp. "You're late," the woman said, crisp as a fresh page. Lila nodded. "Yes. The light rail stalled 2 stops from here. I walked the rest." Pause. "And I had to stop to retie my bootlaces 3 times because, apparently, they've decided to fray at once." Her words fell with quiet honesty. Not excuses. She smoothed the coffee stain on her resume and added, "But I'm here." The receptionist blinked. Most people babbled apologies, promising it would never happen again. This woman simply stated the facts, with a strange, serene weight. After a moment's hesitation, the receptionist pressed a button. "Mr. Whitaker candidate is here." 5 minutes later, Lila stood in a grand office that smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Behind a desk wide enough to park a bicycle sat Graham Whitaker, mid-30s, every line of his suit sharp, his hair combed with military precision, his eyes gray as winter steel lifted to meet hers. For a second, Lila had the oddest sense she was being scanned like a barcode. "You're late," he said. No inflection, no question, just a verdict. "I am..." Lila's voice held steady. "But I'm not careless, and I'm not here to waste your time." Graham's gaze flicked to the resume she placed on his desk. He picked it up with gloved restraint. The page was bent, a corner still faintly damp from the latte. His eyes narrowed. Your degree unfinished? Yes. Experience limited? Correct. He set the paper down. Why apply for a role that no one else has lasted more than 3 weeks? Lila folded her hands in front of her. She had practiced this answer, but when the moment came, she let honesty rise instead of rehearsed lines. Because order doesn't scare me, and chaos doesn't either. I've lived with both. I know how to breathe through it. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. Besides, you need someone who doesn't rattle. Pause. You've had people who polished their resumes until they gleamed. How long did they last? The question hovered in the cedar air. Graham leaned back, studying her as though she were an equation missing variables. He tapped the desk once with his pen. 3-week trial, he said. No promises. If you survive, we'll talk. 3 weeks, Lila repeated, her calmness tinged with a small smile. That's longer than most storms last. He didn't smile back, but he didn't dismiss her either. That, she realized, was the closest thing to approval she would get. When she left the office, staff in the glass-walled break room glanced up. Lacey from marketing whispered, "A week? Tops." Nolan from legal shook his head. 3 days? She's too calm for this place. He'll hate it. Trevor from sales smirked. If she survives the first coffee order, it'll be a miracle. Lila walked past them, scarf still tangled at one end, tote heavy on her shoulder. Her boots clicked steadily on the polished floor. She didn't answer their bets. She simply breathed in, breathed out, and promised herself one thing: she would not quit, even if the storm came. The following morning, Lila Hartman arrived at Whitaker and Reeves Holdings 10 minutes early. Pause. 7:50. Not late. Not rushed. Her scarf was neatly folded into her tote this time, and her boots clicked evenly on the marble floor. The receptionist raised an eyebrow as if to say, "This one showed up again." Lila only smiled, calm and unbothered, and took the elevator up. By the time the doors opened on the 32nd floor, she had mapped out her day in quiet mental blocks. Observe, adjust, survive. Her desk sat directly outside the CEO's office. Not just a desk, a watchtower, a battlefield trench. She set her tote down, unwrapped a bundle of color-coded sticky tabs, and began arranging folders with the quiet confidence of someone setting a dinner table. Green tabs marked time-critical items, amber for strategic pieces that required judgment, blue for documents that could wait until the end of time. When Graham Whitaker stepped out of his office at 8:15, sharp, he paused. His gray eyes landed on the neat stacks. "What are you doing?" "Creating a system," Lila said without looking up. Green for urgent, amber for strategic, blue for archive. "There's already a system," Graham replied. His voice had no edges, just the flat certainty of stone. "It has worked for 5 years. Then you'll be glad to know you now have 2. Competition keeps things sharp." For a moment, silence. Graham's pen tapped once against his palm. He retreated to his office, closing the door a fraction harder than necessary. Lila smoothed the edges of the files. Breath. The storm had acknowledged her. That was enough for now. At 8:45, the phone rang. Lila straightened, picked up the receiver. "Whitaker and Reeves Holdings. This is Lila Hartman. How can I direct your call?" The voice on the other end carried authority. "Dana Montgomery, Prairie Line Logistics. I need to speak with Graham immediately." Lila glanced at the calendar. No note of a call. She pressed the wrong extension in haste. "Transferring you now?" Click. Seconds later, Graham's door opened. His eyes were sharp. "You just sent Dana Montgomery to sales," he said flatly. Lila blinked. "Did I? Prairie Line is our most important logistics client. They are not a sales inquiry. Noted. Montgomery equals straight to you. Sales equals never." She scribbled the equation on a notepad. Graham studied her for a fraction too long, then closed his door again. 5 minutes later. The phone rang once more. Dana's voice, clipped but not yet angry. Lila exhaled slowly, apologized sincerely, and transferred the call correctly. When the line clicked over, she whispered to herself, "Round 2 survived." Pause. Near 10, a young courier appeared with a manila envelope. "Browning and Shaw, LLP, legal addenda for Whitaker," he said. Lila signed her full name on the receipt line and took the packet. Settling back at her desk, she thumbed through the pages out of habit. Something caught her eye, page numbers misaligned, and a clause referencing a venue in Chicago, though the contract was clearly marked Denver. She didn't need a law degree to know those details could spark a fire. She stuck a bright green tab beside the errors, added a calm note in neat handwriting, venue inconsistent with contract header. "Please confirm." When Graham emerged, she held out the packet with both hands. "Routine addenda, but there's a page misnumbered and a venue mismatch. I flagged them." He frowned, flipping quickly. His eyes froze on the tab. "You noticed this?" "Yes. This clause could have cost us millions in litigation." His voice was low, astonished despite itself. "Then it's fortunate I read it," Lila said, her tone unshaken. For the first time, Graham looked at her not as an intruder in his ordered world, but as someone who might see what others missed. At 11, Lila carried 2 paper cups into his office. She set one on his desk, a latte, mild, a little vanilla. He eyed it like a suspicious file. "I drink black, no sugar, no additives, I know. But I thought you might like to try flavor." "I don't need flavor," he replied. "I need function." "Interesting," she said, sipping her own. "When did useful replace human? When did coffee become fuel instead of comfort?" He didn't answer. He took the cup, smelled it, then set it down untouched. Lila didn't push. She only sipped her latte and thought of her aunt's kitchen, where coffee was always served with cinnamon and cream, and where the act of pouring was as important as the drinking. Behind her, in the open work area, murmurs floated. "Already poking around in contracts," Lacey whispered. "She'll be gone in a week." Trevor smirked. "She doesn't play small," Nolan countered softly. "That's what worries them." Lila heard enough to know the tune. Women who stepped into visibility were framed as risks, too bold, too present, too disruptive. She didn't respond. She didn't raise her voice. She simply wrote in her notebook, "Listen, note, do not feed gossip, facts only." Then she turned the page, lifted her pen, and prepared for the next storm. By Wednesday morning, the 32nd floor hummed with nervous energy. Prairie Line Logistics had been circling the idea of a major expansion into Colorado, but whispers of hesitation drifted through the corridors. Numbers didn't lie, but sometimes they didn't speak loudly enough, either. Lila Hartman had spent the night before in her small Denver apartment, cross-legged on the worn couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She read everything she could find: county zoning board minutes, freight corridor maps and miles, labor statistics within a 25-mile radius of proposed sites, and, tucked away in the legislative archive, a fresh piece of news: the Western Renewable Incentive Act, passed only last week, up to 30% in tax credits for companies expanding operations in Colorado within the next 18 months. A ticking window of opportunity disguised as dry legalese. Lila had whispered to herself at 2 a.m, read like the lights might go out. She believed that because they had, once, in her own life when the bills were too high and the fridge light stayed dark until the next paycheck cleared. Reading wasn't a pastime. It was survival. It was preparation for storms. At 9 sharp, the phone rang again with the kind of urgency that carried weight even through copper wires. "This is Dana Montgomery," the voice said. "Prairie Line's CEO. Again." Her tone was different this time, taut with second thoughts. "I need to speak with Graham Whitaker. Expansion is looking unstable." Lila's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "One moment, Ms. Montgomery. Before I transfer you, May I ask, are your concerns about short-term volatility or long-term viability? There was a pause. Dana sounded faintly surprised. Both. Freight costs are climbing, and labor pools seem shallow. Fuel surcharges could eat margins before the first year ends. Lila took a breath. The facts lined up in her mind like calm stepping stones. With respect, she said, the Western Renewable Incentive Act just passed. It offers 30% tax credits on qualifying expansions. That window closes in 18 months. County permitting in Weld and Larimer runs 12 to 14 months on average. That still leaves a buffer. She paused only to check her notes, then added, the freight corridor along I-25 reduces surcharge risk by cutting average haul distance by 18 miles per trip compared to the Utah alternative. That's a meaningful savings. And the labor pool within a 25-mile radius includes a strong base of skilled workers from 2 community colleges. You'll be competing with fewer employers than in Salt Lake or Albuquerque. The line went quiet. Then Dana exhaled. Where did you get all that I read? Lila replied softly. Like the lights might go out. From inside his office, Graham had stepped into the doorway, silent but listening. When Lila finally transferred the call through, he caught her eye. Something unspoken passed between them. Not approval exactly, but not disapproval either. Pause. Something closer to curiosity. The call with Dana stretched for nearly 20 minutes. When it ended, Graham emerged fully, his suit jacket sharp against the morning light. You laid out legislative timing, freight corridors, labor pools, without a binder in front of you, he said. His voice was still cool, but the edge had softened. Lila folded her notebook closed. Because I had already read it, he studied her. Why she met his gaze, calm, unflinching, because preparation is the only thing that makes uncertainty less terrifying. You read the world like it owes you certainty. I read like the lights might go out. For the first time, Graham's gray eyes flickered not with suspicion, but with something more unsettled, admiration, though he would never name it out loud. The office murmurs traveled fast. Lacey from marketing whispered by the coffee machine. She just schooled Montgomery on freight corridors. Trevor rolled his eyes. That'll make her insufferable. But Nolan from legal simply nodded. That'll make her indispensable. Even the skeptical receptionist downstairs noticed that when Graham walked Lila's way later that morning, his stride slowed, just enough to suggest he was listening more carefully than before. At her desk, Lila exhaled quietly. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She wasn't trying to prove brilliance. She was just trying to keep the lights on for herself, for her aunt, for whatever fragile stability life had yet to hand her. Yet somehow, the facts she carried like small lanterns had illuminated a path the experts had overlooked. For the first time since stepping through those glass doors, she felt the air shift, not into warmth exactly, but into something less frigid. The storm was still there, but she had found a way to breathe through it. And maybe, just maybe, Graham Whitaker had noticed. The Brown Palace Hotel in downtown Denver had seen its share of banquets, but that night it gleamed brighter than usual. Chandeliers spilled golden light across a ballroom filled with muted tuxedos, black gowns, and the steady rise of a string quartet's bow. Whitaker and Reeves's annual gala was meant to signal strength numbers tallied, contracts won, investors reassured. For most, it was another performance in an endless corporate theater. For Lila Hartman, it felt like walking onto ice that could crack with a single wrong step. Her dress wasn't loud. Deep green satin, rented for the night, paired with classic black pumps. Understated elegance. Nothing to draw a whisper, but enough to let her walk without shrinking. She pinned her hair back simply, brushed on mascara, and told herself, steady, steady. When she entered the ballroom, her boots and tote had been traded for heels and a clutch. But inside, she was still the same woman who scribbled notes with colored tabs. Near the center of the room, a waiter balancing a tray of champagne glasses wobbled as he turned too quickly. The tray tilted, crystal flutes cascading like dominoes. Graham Whitaker had been speaking with 2 investors, posture perfect, when the champagne fell toward him. With reflexive precision, he stepped aside. The glasses crashed to the floor, a sharp splash of gold against marble. Silence gripped the room. At the center of the accident stood Lila, hands outstretched from where she had stumbled against the waiter. Her cheeks flushed red as the last drop splattered onto Graham's polished shoes. "I am so sorry," she managed, her voice quiet but clear. The room waited for the storm, the icy reprimand everyone knew. Instead, Graham glanced at her hands. "Are you hurt?" It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't the cold dismissal she expected either. The quartet resumed its melody. The whispers dulled. The room exhaled, later, on a balcony that overlooked Denver's winter lights. The air was sharp and unfiltered. Graham leaned against the railing, hands clasped behind his back. Lila joined him, still steadying her breath. "You watch the pianist," she said softly, like someone who knew the music. "I used to play," he admitted. His tone was low, almost reluctant, until my mother said it was decorative, not useful. Eleanor Whitaker, Lila recalled. Exacting. Yes. He gave the faintest nod. Lila looked out over the city. "When I was a kid, we measured flour by the cup and wore coats that were already worn thin before we got them. My aunt taught me to listen to rooms. You find the silences first, then the truths hiding underneath." Graham turned, studying her profile. "And what do you hear now?" "That you miss music more than you'll admit," she said. "And that usefulness has been your armor so long, you forgot what it was protecting." His jaw shifted, but he didn't reply. Instead, the city lights filled the silence between them. The moment fractured when Trevor Reed, vice president of sales, stumbled onto the balcony. His tie hung loose, his smile sloppy. "Well, look who's here," Trevor said, eyes raking over Lila. "The prettiest assistant in the company." "Trevor," Lila said, firm but polite. "You look incredible in that dress. How about a dance?" He stepped closer, hand extended. "Thanks, but no," she said. Calm, final. He laughed, ignoring her refusal. "Come on, just one." His hand brushed toward her wrist, before she could pull back. Graham moved, cool, steel, no theatrics. He positioned himself between them, his voice flat as glass. She said no. Trevor chuckled nervously. "Relax, Whitaker, just a dance." "Go inside," Graham said, not loud, not angry, but final. Something in his tone cut through Trevor's haze. He muttered an apology and staggered back toward the ballroom. Lila's hands trembled despite herself. Old instincts whispered slip away, disappear, don't cause waves. New instincts pressed harder. Hold your ground, you don't vanish anymore. Graham noticed the tremor. He didn't offer platitudes or clumsy comfort. Instead, he handed her a glass of water from a side table. "Here," he said simply. The gesture was so ordinary it steadied her more than any grand reassurance could. She took a sip, drew a breath, and met his eyes. "Thank you," she said. He only nodded, but in the nod was a rare acknowledgement that beneath the numbers, beneath the armor, they were both walking on thin ice. And for a moment, neither was alone on it. It began with a phone call. At his desk, Graham Whitaker held the receiver at arm's length, jaw tight. On the other end, his mother's voice was brisk, polished, and immovable. "Arthur Reeves's daughter is in town. Corporate law, Yale graduate. I've scheduled lunch for Friday. You'll both attend?" "Mother, no excuses. Graham, a man in your position requires a proper match. Someone with pedigree." His fingers tightened on the receiver. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Lila Hartman calmly sorting files at her desk, green and amber tabs catching the light. The words left him before he thought them through. "I'm already seeing someone." Silence. His mother's tone sharpened. "Since when?" "Recently. It's new." He swallowed. "Her name is Lila. Then bring her..." Click! The line went dead. Graham lowered the receiver slowly. His order, his system, had just spun off course, and Lila, pause, had no idea what storm he'd just pulled her into. When he told her later that day, she sat very still, pen poised above her notebook. "You used me as a shield," she said finally. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, quiet, deliberate. "I panicked," Graham admitted. "I couldn't face another orchestrated introduction. So, you volunteered me. I'm asking you to help me. Lunch at Cherry Creek Grill. Just one meal. My mother will move on if she believes I already." He hesitated. "If I already care for someone." Lila tapped the pen once against the page. "Truth eventually, boundaries immediately. If you blur either, I'm out." He exhaled, a rare crack in his certainty. Understood. Friday arrived. The Cherry Creek Grill buzzed with the polished rhythm of Denver's upper echelon mahogany tables, crisp white napkins, the faint scent of cedar smoke from the kitchen. Eleanor Whitaker sat waiting, posture as flawless as her pearls. Her gaze swept over Lila the way a jeweler inspects a stone. "So," she began, after Graham's introductions, "You're Lila Hartman. I am—" Lila placed her napkin in her lap with unhurried grace. "And what is your background?" Eleanor asked, voice smooth but heavy with expectation. Lila could have dressed the truth in gloss. Instead, she set it down plain. "I started college but didn't finish. My aunt fell ill. I became her caregiver." She met Eleanor's eyes, steady. "I've worked hourly jobs since sometimes 2 at a time. Bills don't wait for degrees." The silence stretched across the tablecloth. Then Lila added softly, "Dignity doesn't come from pedigree. It comes from showing up." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, as if unused to such candor. Graham glanced between them, bracing for dismissal. But Lila went on, her tone lightening. "Your son tells me he used to play piano. I hope he hasn't abandoned it entirely. Talents shouldn't be exiled." For the first time, Eleanor's expression softened, faint as dawn. "He was gifted," she said, almost wistful. "But he insisted on other pursuits." Lila smiled. "Sometimes we need someone to remind us what deserves to stay." The rest of lunch unfolded not with fireworks, but with an odd, unexpected ease. Eleanor asked few more questions. But when dessert arrived, her glance toward Lila carried less scrutiny, more curiosity. Outside the restaurant, the winter air was crisp against Lila's cheeks. She folded her scarf tighter, heels clicking on the pavement. Graham walked beside her, unusually quiet. Finally, she turned to him. "Don't make me your shield again." His gaze dropped, then lifted. Understood, no excuses, no deflection, just a rare acknowledgement, quiet as snowfall. For Lila, that was enough for now. Harbor Nest had sounded promising when the account first came. In an app designed to help family caregivers coordinate medications, rides, and bills. A tool for those juggling work, kids, and aging parents at the same time. But now, 3 months into negotiations, the founder was restless. "Your proposals feel too corporate," came the note from Harbor Nest headquarters. "We don't see ourselves in the slides." For Whitaker and Reeves, that was a dagger. Graham insisted on polish, and polish had always won contracts before. But here, the polish was sliding off like cheap veneer. By Thursday morning, the 32nd floor conference room was filled with tension. Graham sat at the head, flanked by department leads. Lila Hartman stood quietly near the back, a notepad balanced against her palm. She wasn't meant to speak. She wasn't on the agenda. The meeting began with numbers, charts, and bullet points. Lacey from marketing clicked through slides about strategic alignment and efficiency metrics. Across the table, Harbor Nest founder Ava Brooks, a woman in her 40s with tired but intelligent eyes, leaned back in her chair. Her expression said everything unimpressed. When Lacey concluded, Ava folded her hands. "That's fine, but it feels like you're selling me a bank. I started Harbor Nest for people who live at 2, ma'am. trying to remember if they already gave their father his medication. Your presentation doesn't sound like that world. The silence in the room was heavy. Graham straightened, ready to counter. But before he spoke, Lila's voice cut in softly. "May I?" Every head turned. She walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and breathed once before speaking. Caregivers don't live in polished slides. They live in pillboxes and cracked phone screens. They live in alarms going off when the rest of the house is asleep. She sketched quickly a bedside table cluttered with pill bottles, a phone buzzing with reminders, a sticky note stuck crookedly to a lamp. They aren't inspired by perfect models and spotless kitchens. They're reassured by knowing someone else understands what exhaustion looks like. She wrote a phrase across the board. "We see you, even at 2 a.m." Ava leaned forward, eyes sharp now. Lila went on, voice calm but resonant. The soundtrack shouldn't be triumphant strings. It should be the creak of a refrigerator door, the shuffle of slippers down a hallway, the sigh after someone sits back in bed knowing they didn't forget a dose. Real caregivers, real sounds, real life. She paused, then added carefully, a touch of humor. Yes, a meme sparingly used to break the heaviness, but mostly faces and voices of people who've lived it. She stepped back. Cap clicked on the marker. That's what Harbor Nest should sound like. The room stayed quiet, but Ava's expression had transformed. She looked not at the slides, but at the board, at the messy sketch of pill bottles and sticky notes. "You sound," Ava said slowly, "like you've actually been there." Lila set the marker down. "I have my aunt. We measured life in cups of flour and pill reminders. I know what it means to live in both order and chaos." Ava's face softened. "That's exactly what we want our brand to carry. Warmth, truth, not just polish." She turned to Graham. "I'd like Lila to take creative lead on this." The shift was seismic, a founder choosing the assistant as point person. The air in the conference room changed temperature. Trevor Reed smirked from his seat in sales, clearly delighted by the disruption this would cause. Lacey's smile tightened, the color in her cheeks rising. Nolan from legal leaned back slowly, a line deepening between his brows. He was already calculating the politics. Graham's eyes flicked to Lila. For the first time in a long time, the control he wore like armor cracked not in anger, but in something stranger. He gave a single nod. "Very well." After the meeting, whispers flew. "Did you see that Lacey hissed in the break room?" She hijacked the pitch, muttered another. "No," Nolan corrected, voice low. "She saved it." Through it all, Lila returned to her desk, calm as ever. She pulled out a green tab, marked the word Harbor Nest Lead, and wrote underneath, "See them at 2 a.m." She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, she only breathed, steady. Pause. Another storm had come, another storm survived. The office lights had long gone dark. Only Graham Whitaker's corner office still glowed against the Denver skyline, a solitary square of white in a tower of shadows. Lila Hartman hesitated outside his door, the silence too deep for this hour. She knocked softly. No answer. When she pushed the door open, she found him still at his desk, tie loosened, skin pale, Graham. His head lifted slowly, eyes unfocused, just finishing. His words slurred, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked less like the immovable CEO and more like a man who'd run too far without stopping. "You're burning up," she said, moving closer. She touched his wrist, cool against her fingers. Heat radiated through his suit sleeve. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Work doesn't wait. Neither does a fever." She steadied her tone. "Couch, now." To her surprise, he didn't argue long. She guided him to the leather couch by the window. He sank into it, shoulders heavy, eyes closing as though he hadn't slept in days. Within minutes, Lila had slipped out, returned with what she could scavenge from the break room and corner store ibuprofen, a bag of ice, chamomile tea, and a sandwich stacked with 6 ounces of turkey and mustard. Practical, Simple, nothing fancy. She set the tea to steep, placed 2 pills in his palm, swallow, then eat. He complied, too drained to protest. When he tried to sit forward, she pressed gently on his shoulder. Rest. She dampened a towel in cool water and laid it across his forehead, inch by inch. She checked his temperature with her hand. Not grand. Sweeping gestures, just quiet. Careful touches. The way someone measures the heat of a stove before setting down a pan. The city outside hummed faintly, but in that office the world had shrunk to the sound of his shallow breathing and the clink of ice settling in a glass. After a while, Graham's voice broke the silence. "Do you know what my mother taught me?" Lila sat in the chair beside the couch, hands folded in her lap. "What's that?" "That dependency is weakness." He kept his eyes closed. Needing anyone, even briefly, meant you weren't strong enough to lead. I memorized that rule. I lived it. And now, here I am. He stopped, his breath rough. On this couch, depending on you. She studied him in the dim light, his hair damp against his forehead, his tie discarded on the floor. Not the untouchable CEO, but a man caught in the grip of exhaustion. Maybe needing someone isn't weakness, she said softly. Maybe pretending you don't is. His eyes opened then, meeting hers. For a moment, the air thickened. A line of possibility stretched between them, fragile and undeniable. He reached, not with force but with hesitation, his hand brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. The space between them shrank, breath mingling, silence deep, almost. Then Lila drew back, steady but firm. "Let's not owe this to a fever." The words landed with both relief and regret. Graham leaned back against the couch, eyes closing again. "You're right." But his hand lingered a fraction too long on hers before slipping away. The quiet that followed was heavy, not with awkwardness but with unspoken truths. Inside her chest, Lila's thoughts pressed hard. She had worked too long, fought too hard, to be reduced to a rumor the assistant who caught the CEO's eye. Her dignity was not for sale, not even to a moment of weakness, and yet her heart had leaned toward him, against her better judgment, against the rules she had carved for herself. Graham, in his fever haze, fought a different fear, the fear that if he let himself lean, he would never unlearn it, that needing someone might unravel every pillar he had built his life upon. They both sat with their fears, quietly. Long pause, and for that night, the line between them held. Monday mornings at Whitaker and Reeves were usually a storm of reports and calls. But that morning, the storm gathered in one room, the boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Denver's skyline. The long oak table gleamed under recessed lights. At its head sat Richard Klein, the board's chair, silver-haired, eyes sharp as scalpels. Beside him, Oliver Hume, the CFO, fingers steepled, lips pressed thin. On the other side, Patricia Webb, independent director, watchful but unreadable. Around them, the senior circle HR, legal, marketing, and at the far end of the table, Graham Whitaker, posture stiff, jaw locked. Lila Hartman took a seat along the side, not at the table's center, but close enough to feel the weight of the stairs. She straightened her notes. Though she hadn't been given an agenda, something in the air told her this was not a meeting, it was a trial. Richard cleared his throat. Concerns have been raised. His tone was polished but cold. About the pace and manner of certain advancements. Oliver leaned in, specifically regarding Ms. Hartman, her unusual involvement in client-facing matters, her meteoric visibility. A murmur circled the room. Then Trevor Reed, sales VP, rose from his seat with a performance of regret. I hate to bring this up, but appearances matter. When an assistant suddenly leaps into strategic roles, clients notice, staff notice, it creates the impression of favoritism. He placed a hand on his chest, as though delivering bad news he wished weren't true. And appearances can damage this firm. The words stung, not because they were surprising, but because they were rehearsed. Lila kept her spine straight, her breath slow. She glanced at Graham. He sat motionless, eyes on the table. Risk calculus was happening behind those gray eyes. Empathy. For once, lost to caution. The silence grew, heavy, suffocating. Finally, Richard turned. Ms. Hartman, what do you say to these concerns? Lila rose, not dramatically, not in anger, simply, with the same calm she had carried through every storm. I say the hours are documented, the outcomes are measurable. Audit trails exist for every contribution I've made. If you call it favoritism when competence is visible, then perhaps the issue is not my record, but the lens through which you view it. Her voice was even, but her eyes were steady fire. I have worked late nights that no one recorded. I have read legislation most of you didn't glance at. I've prepared client briefs when others chose to sleep, and I've done it without fanfare, without title, without protection. She let the words settle, then added, softer but sharper. Gossip is often how women's ambition is policed. We are told to shrink, to dim, to smile smaller. I will not apologize for being seen. A beat of silence. Then she slid her key card onto the polished oak. But I will not remain where truth is treated as liability. The room stiffened. Trevor blinked, surprised by her refusal to cower. Oliver shifted, uncomfortable. Patricia Webb's lips pressed tight, as though hiding something approval, perhaps, but muted by politics. Lila lifted her tote, calm, deliberate, no tears, no theatrics, just presence, I resign, on principle. She turned and walked out, heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step measured, she kept her name intact, even as the door closed behind her. Inside the boardroom, the silence was louder than any argument. Richard shuffled papers. Oliver cleared his throat. Trevor smirked faintly, as if victory had been easy. But at the far end, Graham sat frozen. The air around him felt heavier than the windows pressing against the skyline. His silence had saved him from immediate risk. Yet, even as the meeting resumed, his chest hollowed with a realization. Silence had a cost. He had just paid it with her. And somewhere down the hall, the echo of her footsteps marked the debt he now owed. The days after Lila left passed like half-drawn breaths. The office still functioned. Phones rang, contracts circulated, PowerPoint slides glowed. But the current was gone. Conversations thinned. Clients noticed. Harbor Nest, once so energized by her voice, sent an email that was polite but restless. We need reassurance, they wrote. Translation, we need her. Graham Whitaker sat at his desk, trying to concentrate, but every file folder Lila had organized by color mocked him with its neatness. The absence of her humming, her blunt honesty, her improbable steadiness, it hollowed the air. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He even drove by her apartment, empty. It was David Nolan, from Legal, who finally offered a thread. Saw something on Instagram, he said cautiously. She's been volunteering at a place called Kindred Hooves Sanctuary, Golden, Colorado. Posted a photo with a goat. A goat. Graham almost laughed. Instead, he grabbed his keys. Golden lay west, tucked against the Rockies, where the city's glass edges softened into fields and red rock. Graham drove there in a charcoal suit and polished shoes. The only uniform he knew. The sanctuary smelled of hay, sun-warmed wood, and animal musk. Paddocks stretched under a broad September sky. Volunteers in jeans and boots moved easily among the pens. He spotted her immediately, Lila Hartman, hair tied back, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn jeans. She knelt in straw, bottle-feeding a kid goat with quiet concentration. She looked lighter than she had in weeks, though her shoulders carried a familiar steel. Graham stepped forward, too fast. His shoe caught on loose straw. He slipped, landed awkwardly against a bale, and a baby goat trotted over curiously, tugging on his silk tie. Hay clung to his hair. His cufflinks were scratched, his dignity gone. Lila looked up. For the first time in days, she laughed. A short, surprised laugh, but real. You look ridiculous. Accurate, Graham admitted, tugging futilely at his tie while the goat persisted. When he finally managed to sit, still hay-strewn, he didn't launch into a rehearsed speech. He had practiced lines in the car, safe words, tidy words, but they burned away now, under her eyes. "Lila," he began, voice low, "I failed you. In that boardroom I froze. I thought silence would keep us both safe. But silence was betrayal. Of you. Of what you'd done. Of who you are." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, ignoring the straw that clung to his trousers. "I've spent my life choosing control over courage, and I let that habit strip me of decency when it mattered most. I'm ashamed of that. I need you to know I am not here for optics. I am here because I don't want to keep building a life out of fear." His throat tightened. He forced the words out anyway. "If you come back, it won't be as my shield. It will be as my partner. On your terms." Lila studied him. The goat still gnawed his tie. He didn't swat it away. That, in its small absurdity, said more than any corporate statement. She stood, brushing straw from her jeans. "Words are easy. Graham, conditions matter." Her voice was clear, even. "You want me back. Then you defend me publicly, out loud, without hedging. You fix the structure that makes gossip into a weapon. That means anti-harassment training, with teeth, not slides. Transparent promotion matrices. So ambition isn't confused with impropriety. And Trevor investigated, not shuffled sideways. Investigated? Her tone sharpened. If this firm is to be worth any woman's labor, it has to be different. Graham listened. He didn't flinch. Yes, all of it, in writing. By the end of the week, good. She said simply. She didn't rush. She let silence hang. Let the mountains behind her, the goats around her, hold witness. Finally, she extended a hand. Not trust. Not yet. But terms. And terms are a start. He took her hand. His grip was firm, but not claiming. More a pledge, a promise made in straw, with goats tugging silk. For the first time in his adult life, Graham Whitaker knelt in hay and let his pride stay there. The Monday after her return, something unusual happened in the lobby of Whitaker and Reeves. People looked up, some smiled, not the forced kind, but the kind that carried a flicker of relief. Lila Hartman walked in with steady steps, hair pulled back, a binder under her arm. She wasn't the assistant anymore. The placard on her new desk glass. Understated red, Director of Creative Strategy. Her promotion wasn't whispered. It was posted. Alongside it, a notice from the board, pay equity audit complete. Transparent promotion ladder now displayed in break room. Below the neat bullet points, another line caught attention. Trevor Reed, VP Sales, placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No rumors this time, just policy, finally spelled out. The first order of business harbor nest. In the conference room, Lila stood before a wide screen. Instead of glossy slides, she queued up video clips. A mother at a kitchen table sorting pill bottles by hand. A brother helping his wheelchair-bound sibling into a van, mileage odometer ticking. A teenager setting reminders on a cracked phone screen while folding laundry. The narration wasn't polished, it was gentle. A voiceover like late-night radio, describing miles driven, pounds lifted. Pill counts tallied the unglamorous currency of caregiving. No pity, just truth. This, Lila said quietly, is where Harbor Nest lives. Not in boardrooms, not in graphs, in the hours people give when no one else is watching. Graham Whitaker sat across the table, expression unreadable. When the lights came back on, he steepled his fingers. It's strong, he admitted, but without tidy graphs, stakeholders may question rigor. Data persuades, stories fade. The words landed like frost. Lila's pen tapped once against her notebook. Graphs are tidy lies. They flatten reality. Caregivers don't live in pie charts. They live in alarm clocks at 2 a. A hush settled over the room. Someone coughed. The tension drew the oxygen thin. They carried the argument into the hallway. "You want investors, you need numbers." Graham pressed, voice low but taut. "You want people, you need texture." Lila shot back. They were standing too close, each unwilling to yield. Her pulse drummed, his jaw clenched. For a moment, it felt less like disagreement and more like static heat waiting for ignition. Then, it happened. The kiss wasn't polished. It wasn't planned. It was sharp, startling, the collision of two wills tired of resisting gravity. And then just as suddenly they broke apart. Both stood breathless, stunned by their own audacity. Lila spoke first. "Boundaries?" Graham nodded. "Delivery first?" No more words. They turned back toward the conference room, carrying the unspoken like a live wire between them. 2 weeks later, HarborNest's pilot campaign rolled out. App signups surged 12% in the first 48 hours. Inbound calls came from 3 major hospital systems wanting partnerships. A rural county 45 miles out requested a tailored pilot for farm families with limited broadband. Metrics rose. So did murmurs in the office. This time, though, the murmurs weren't about gossip. They were about results. And at the center of it all, Lila kept her spine straight, her eyes steady, and her voice tuned not to impress, but to be heard. The invitation alone carried weight. Summit Ridge Capital, one of the largest private equity firms in the Rockies. The prize, a $70 million 5-year partnership, would reshape Whitaker and Reeves for the next decade. On the morning of the pitch, the air in the office felt taut as wire. Staff rehearsed data points, adjusted graphs, double-checked handouts. Lila Hartman dressed simply but sharply. Charcoal blazer, dark green blouse, a necklace that had belonged to her aunt. Graham Whitaker matched her stride in a tailored suit, polished but less severe than months ago. They rode the elevator down together, silence carrying more charge than conversation. The presentation began in a glass-walled conference room high above Denver. The skyline stretched endless behind them, as if the city itself leaned in to listen. Lila stood ready with slides and video clips, Graham with financial projections. The Summit Ridge partners, 6 of them, each seasoned, each stone-faced, watched without giving much away. Halfway through, Graham's phone vibrated. He frowned. "Mother?" He silenced it. It buzzed again, and again. He excused himself, jaw tightening. In the hallway, he answered. Eleanor Whitaker's voice was urgent. "I'm at the hospital." Cold flooded his chest. "What happened? A fall? My ankle? Doctors are still running tests. You'd better come." There was no question. He left, torn between duty and dread. At the hospital, Graham found Eleanor sitting upright, foot elevated, scrolling through her phone. The nurse's note read, "Minor sprain." "You dragged me out of a $70 million meeting for this." His voice cracked between disbelief and anger. Eleanor's smile was thin. A man should be there when his mother calls. Consider it a test. Graham felt the ground tilt. Not a medical emergency, a power play. For the first time, he didn't fold. "I'm leaving," he said. "I should have never come." He turned, ignoring her protests, and raced back through traffic toward the office towers. Meanwhile, in the conference room, Lila stood alone. The partners noticed Graham's absence but said nothing. One of them, a woman named Marianne Brooks, leaned forward. "Ms. Hartman, why should we believe HarborNest can scale to rural communities when your CEO isn't even here to finish the pitch?" The moment could have shattered her. Instead, Lila drew a slow breath. "Because caregiving doesn't wait for perfect attendance," she said evenly. "It happens when someone doesn't show up, and the system still has to hold." She stepped away from the screen, picking up a marker. On the whiteboard, she wrote 3 phrases: time, weight, cost. Caregivers don't live in abstract ROI. They live in schedules taped to refrigerators. They live in driveways measured in 40 feet of snow to shovel before they can drive a parent to dialysis. They live in grocery bags that weigh 30 pounds when their backs can only handle 15. They live in co-pays $80.65 this month, $97.10 the next. The room stilled. Lila set down the marker. If Harbor Nest can reduce missed appointments by 10%, that saves insurers millions. But more than that, it saves daughters from quitting jobs, sons from skipping classes, grandparents from suffering because no one could coordinate the details. The return is financial and moral, and it compounds every day. Silence hung for 3 beats. Then Marianne Brooks nodded slowly. Another partner scribbled notes. The current shifted. The door cracked open just as the partners leaned back, murmuring to one another. Graham slipped in, breathless, tie askew. He didn't interrupt. He stood in the doorway, listening. Lila closed with one quiet sentence. Caregivers deserve tools that match the reality of their labor. Harbor Nest delivers that, and Whitaker and Reeves is ready to carry it forward. The partners exchanged glances. Handshakes followed. Then the lead partner spoke. Expect our email by close of business. That night, the email came, $70 million, 5-year partnership. Applause rippled through the office. Champagne corks popped. Graham stood near the window, watching the city lights blur. He had witnessed something that undid his certainty. Lila Hartman hadn't just filled the gap. She had owned the biggest room, without theatrics, without pedigree, with nothing but truth measured in feet, pounds, and dollars. And in that doorway, Graham Whitaker finally understood partnership wasn't about holding the podium. It was about letting go of it so the right voice could carry. The ballroom shimmered with glass chandeliers and polished shoes. The annual Caregiver Foundation Gala had drawn the city's elite, but for once, the speeches weren't about quarterly gains. Tonight, the focus was caregivers, the invisible backbone of families, neighborhoods, and communities. Graham Whitaker took the stage in a black tuxedo, notes in hand. The teleprompter waited, its neat script ready. He began with practiced ease, thanking donors, nodding to dignitaries. But then he stopped. His gaze shifted toward the front row, where Lila Hartman sat in a midnight blue dress, steady as ever. He set his notes aside. My company used to believe success was measured only in contracts and percentages. Order, efficiency, control. I believed it too, until someone walked in and refused to let me confuse rigidity with strength. She showed us that numbers matter, but so do the hands that carry soup at 2 a.m. So do the backs that lift. So do the hearts that break when the work is unseen. He paused, voice tightening. That someone is Lila Hartman. She didn't just change our strategy, she changed our soul. The room stilled. Then applause swelled, not polite but thunderous. The applause softened into murmurs as Graham reached into his jacket. The mic caught the faint clink of a small box. He knelt too quickly. There was an audible rip. His tuxedo trousers split at the seam. The sound picked up perfectly by the microphone. The ballroom erupted in laughter, kind laughter, the kind that disarms. Graham's face flushed crimson, but he stayed kneeling. Box open. Not how I rehearsed this, he muttered, which only made the room laugh harder. Lila rose from her seat, walked up onto the stage, and stood before him. He looked up, eyes stripped of armor. Lila Hartman, he said, voice steady despite the ruin of his trousers. Will you marry me and remind me every day that control without tenderness is hollow? Lila's smile trembled. She reached down, helped him to his feet. Yes, she whispered. Into the mic, she added. But first, let's get you a tailor. The room roared. Applause lifted like a tide. The wedding came in spring, not in a cathedral or ballroom, but in the foothills outside Golden, Colorado. A meadow open to the mountains, dotted with folding chairs and wildflowers. Their vows were simple. Graham promised to shut the laptop after midnight at least once a week. Lila promised to remind him that graphs are not bedtime stories. The reception offered no gold-plated menu, just sheet cake with too much frosting, thick, sweet, unapologetic. Children ran across the grass with faces smeared white and pink. Eleanor Whitaker wept openly, mascara streaking, no longer hiding behind pearls. As the sun slipped low, a piano appeared on the edge of the meadow. Graham sat, hands uncertain at first, then steady, playing a melody he hadn't touched in years. Notes drifted across the field like old friends finally welcomed home. Guests leaned against each other, measuring the evening wind in inches on their napkins, laughing at the improvised science of celebration. Later, when the last guests had gone and the last plates were stacked, the two of them found themselves in a quiet kitchen. It wasn't the grandeur of an estate, just a rented house near the foothills, countertops still cluttered with leftover cake and mismatched mugs. Graham reached for the coffee pot, black, no sugar. Lila reached for another mug, sweet, with cream. They moved in rhythm, side by side, without stepping on each other's paths. Different cups, same silence, same space. Work that harmed the human heart that was not success. Power without tenderness that was brittle. And policies mattered, yes. But so did the hands that carried soup at 2A. And the small acts that reminded a person they were not alone. In that kitchen, with two coffees steaming in different ways, Graham and Lila leaned against the counter. For the first time in years, he did not feel like he had to hold the room. He only had to hold this moment. And she was right there, listening to the same quiet, together, at its heart. This story is not about corporate power or million-dollar deals. It's about the quiet truth that success without humanity is empty. Graham Whitaker spent years believing that control, discipline, and isolation were strength. But it took Lila Hartman, with her mismatched shoes and unwavering honesty, to remind him that real strength is found in connection, in caring, in listening, in being willing to change. Many of us have lived through seasons where pride, fear, or routine kept us at a distance from others. Yet life always circles back to the same truth: policies matter. But so do people. We measure our days not only in achievements, but in the cups of soup carried to a bedside, the phone calls answered at midnight, the kindnesses that never make it into the reports. For those of us who have carried families, endured hardship, or rebuilt after loss, this lesson feels familiar. Tenderness is not weakness, it is the backbone of survival. And when paired with courage, it can even reshape a world built on walls. Because in the end, what we leave behind is not just the work we did, but the love we dared to give. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and walking through this story. If it touched your heart, inspired your thoughts, or simply gave you a moment of reflection, we'd be grateful if you could support our channel. Please remember to like this video, share it with friends who might also need its message, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. Your support means the world, and it keeps these stories shining.